Merry Christmas, CPAC, and welcome to a very special edition, as this week always has, of America Uncanceled on CPAC Now. We're going to bring to you, I think, a lot of interesting shows over the holidays.
We were going to be very festive and talk about, how wonderful the Christmas season and Advent season is. But instead, we're going to hone in directly into politics with breaking news live with Caroline Wren, senior advisor to Kari Lake. And you're in the middle of this, what's happening here with this trial. And the mere fact is that we actually saw, Matt, this Arizona judge rule in favor of Kari Lake, of at least letting this go to trial, 2 out of the 10 claims. Walk us through what's happening, Caroline.
Oh, it has been a long couple months, and I'm here in Maricopa County right now. And yes, we were very excited when we saw that news. We were prepared for the judge probably to, potentially dismiss. We've seen this for years now when it comes to election contests. And so I was pleasantly surprised when he didn't. Even if he had, we would have immediately appealed and brought it up to the Arizona Supreme Court. And so he agreed to let it go to trial, and he should. There were so many issues on Election Day in Maricopa County. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I was here on the ground, and it was the most disheartening thing you've ever seen. I mean, everyone knew that Republicans were planning to vote on Election Day, and they showed up 3-1 to vote for Kari Lake on Election Day. And starting around like 6 or 7 a.m., all of our phones start blowing up, and people saying, "Hey, we're here. There's an hour-long line, 2-hour line. This is before 8 a.m. There's all these issues. What's going on?" And we're frantically in the war room trying to figure it out. Some places are saying it's tabulator problems. There's all these lines telling people to go to a different location. And you have to think about how many people, went in the morning at 7 a.m. to go vote, but have to take their kids to school by 8:15, and they cannot go on a half-day odyssey to vote on Election Day. And so that just played out throughout the day. And then finally around 3 p.m., I'm in panic mode, and I grabbed Kari and I called Blake Masters and I said, "Meet us at this gas station. I'm getting you all in the car. We're going to go polling place to polling place with a bullhorn and tell people to stay in line." Because we were getting calls from folks saying, that others were just kind of leaving the line. And I think this was problematic even really with Kari, because all the polls had shown that Kari was way up in the race. And so you have to think about the people who also are reading about these long lines and then
Caroline,
thought that she was going to win.
How is it even possible to quantify the numbers of people? And I would have put myself in this camp, because I would have probably had an appointment or something I had to do, who eventually just didn't vote. I mean, is there any way you can estimate that by the eventual turnout numbers?
I don't think there's a way to ever really quantify that. And Abe Hamadeh is down by 500 votes right now. 500. And so Abe, we had good news yesterday, by the way. Abe's case is going to trial on Friday. So
there's separate cases.
It's separate
cases. Is it the
cases,
same
that's right.
equities that are involved, the same problems in both these cases?
No, they're very different cases. Abe's case is, Abe is currently in the middle of a recount because he was within that threshold, but his case has to do specifically with a certain number of ballots that they think were faulty that should be thrown out. I believe it has to do with signature verification. I'm not really sure. Kari's was a much larger case and is a larger burden to have to prove. We were disappointed that 8 of those charges were thrown out, but the 2 that were left were really the most serious. And they centered around 2 different things. One was around the 325,000 ballots in Maricopa County that broke chain of custody. And in fact, Stephen Richer testified this morning. He is the Maricopa County recorder. He is also ran a super PAC against Kari Lake, which seems a little bit inappropriate to me as someone who is in charge of executing the election. But they asked him about this on the witness stand, which was interesting. But he confirmed that chain of custody was indeed broken. And so,
so for people who are listening who haven't worked in elections, that means that ballots did not go through the legal process to make sure they were supervised appropriately.
That's correct. And those ballots were largely mail-in ballots too, and which obviously went more to Hobbs. But the question becomes the election manual, which again, we were running against the Secretary of State, who wrote the manual, whose job was to execute this election. We called on her to recuse herself multiple times. She did not. And so the chain of custody issue has to do with the election manual that was written by Hobbs, that they admit that they broke that chain of custody. So we don't know what the judge will decide. Does that mean that all those ballots that did not have chain of custody are thrown out? I mean, that's why we're at trial right now. And they've been at trial. They've been in for about 3 hours. They're on a 30-minute break right now. It'll go all afternoon and then all day tomorrow. And so there's all sorts of interesting things coming up. There was an incredible testimony, too, from a witness that said that someone intentionally altered the ballot printer settings to to project basically an improper ballot image that the witness says could not have been an accident. This is the largest charge that is at case in this trial.
Is that why we had the problems with the machines in Maricopa County? Because maybe they were fiddling with these adjustments?
Yes, it had to do with the toner settings, which is just so bizarre. And in fact, Carrie Lake sued 6 months ago over these machines, by the way, and the court threw it out because they said she didn't have standing, which if Carrie Lake, who's on the ballot, didn't have standing, then who does? And sure enough, in the primary, we had a problem where they didn't have enough, they ran out of printer paper like halfway through the day because all these people showed up. So we were kind of trying to think, okay, maybe there'll be a paper issue, and we had like storage of paper ready. But none of us thought that they would have, I think it's 61% of the tabulators, or tabulating locations. We have polling locations all over Maricopa County's, 2/3 of the population of the whole state. 62% went down for between 4 and 8 hours on election day.
Insane.
So people, it just caused mass chaos. And it had to do with the toner settings were incorrect. But what doesn't make sense is, well, people were able to vote using those same machines leading up to Election Day. Why was there no issues leading up to Election Day with the toner settings? Why did this only happen on the day that all of the Republican voters, everyone in the country knows, are now using it as an attack against us about voting Election Day? Everyone knew that we were going to be voting Election Day, so why did more than half of the machines go down when all of the Republicans were voting?
Caroline, how does the Secretary of State even answer that question? Because I know we were looking at the fact that one of these claims is a printer malfunction on Election Day, meaning it created these vulnerabilities that would be susceptible to hacking. I mean, what's the response coming from the Secretary of State, whose office is responsible to make sure that we don't have these issues on Election Day?
Well, unfortunately, the press does not have access to her basement, so that would be the only place you would get a response. So she hasn't commented. She thinks it was a perfectly wonderful, great, well-executed election. And otherwise, she's just, I guess, going about her business of setting up a government. I mean, that would be news to me. The only things I've heard that she's actually done is she has hired, her first hire was some sort of equity inclusion officer or something or another. And then she, on the campaign trail, it said that she was actually going to support the funding of the border wall that Governor Ducey is building, and she's already said that one of her first acts is to rescind that and take that wall down along with the DOJ. So this is stolen elections have consequences, and we've learned that with President Biden, and we are now really, the people of Arizona are going to learn that very hard with Katie Hobbs. Except this trial might go our way, and I'm very hopeful, and we're only a third of the way through right now. But
if we could actually get a judge to do his or her job by listening to the facts and just allowing the facts to determine the outcome instead of getting ahead of the politics and assuming that doing something right will result in riots or chaos or political instability. That's our problem. But Caroline, let's narrow in on this one question. So I've voted here in Northern Virginia, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where people have come in who weren't on the rolls and oftentimes not speaking English. And they've always they've said, well, go ahead and vote. We'll put you in the provisional ballot file. And I know just enough Spanish in these situations to hear what they're doing. And then there's always a question of what happens with these provisionals. They're not legal votes in most cases, but a lot of times judges then allow them to be in the count because races aren't that close. You just said that in Abe Hamadeh's race, which is less than 600 votes, there's a question of are they checking the signatures on the mail-in ballots? This was the big place where they got into fraud in Clark County, where you and I were after the 2020 race. Do you think we could know in the state of Arizona how many ballots that went through the mail or were put in the provisional were not counted because they didn't have the appropriate ID requirement or signature requirement? Do you guys know what that number is, or did they just count everything like they did in Nevada?
Well, that was a huge part of our original lawsuit. And I don't have the number off the top of my head, but that was one of the things that the judge threw out that we were really disappointed about because we thought that was what we thought was something that really, really needed to be looked at. And it was, I can tell you, I remember it was hundreds of thousands of signatures that did not match up. And one of the things, we have a lot of whistleblowers in our case. I mean, and tons of affidavits that were taken. And one of them had said what didn't make sense is there were thousands and thousands upon signatures that were not matching. And this was a whistleblower from within one of the polling locations that weren't matching. But then she ended up being on the ballot curing team, and it would only be like 100 at the end of the day. And she said, well, wait a minute. I know that like 3,000 got kicked back. How are only 100 coming to the curing process? The ballot curing process, of course, is when they kick those over in each team. So if it's a registered Republican or a Democrat, they give those over to us. And we had a week to go out and try and cure the ballot and go and contact that person and voter. So that discrepancy did not ever make sense to us. And it's not one that they're letting us look at. I can't speak enough to have not been able to follow Abe's suit to see what is there. But
the only conclusion we can draw, Caroline, is that the same thing happens. If you get a ballot in a box, and I don't know whether they had boxes in Arizona, but if you turn in a mail-in ballot and they don't check the signatures, that's a license to steal by anybody who's got an organization on the ground that wants to stuff, and ballot harvest.
Well, and the other piece of this is that in Arizona, they don't start counting the ballots, the mailed-in ballots, until after the polls close, which then delays the process even further. That's something like you don't see in states like Florida, but in Arizona, you do witness that. But I want to ask you, Caroline, because one of the discrepancies I saw is, obviously for early voting, the Democrats just outperformed the Republicans. For Katie Hobbs, it was 1.4 million. For Kari Lake, it was about a little over 400,000 early votes. I mean, do you think that there's a lesson learned there of what Republicans need to do to basically compete in terms of these ballot operations?
I absolutely do. And you and I, we've been talking about this for 2 years. The Democrats are so much better at this than we are.
Absolutely.
And Republicans, we chase votes and they chase ballots. That's a big difference. We chase emotions and votes. They are meticulous. For example, Katie Hobbs had set up some sort of website where if you go look at the people who work in government, especially when you look at people working in a Secretary of State's office or something, they have all the lists of everyone who's registered in Excel sheets. They leave those jobs and go work at these nonprofit C3s. You can't tell me they're not taking these lists with each other. And they count down to every single vote. And we start voting a month early. They hire people, and it is just a trickle-down system of one person's in charge of, let's say, 200 ballots, and they will they have 1 month to hammer those people until they get every single one of those ballots in, and they pay them by the ballots that they get in. And it is the problem. It is an extraordinarily expensive operation. It is extraordinarily labor-intensive, but they are meticulous at it, and they know exactly how many votes that they need to get, and they need to get them in. Now, this leaves a lot of open, space for fraud, because if you're paying people to be able to turn ballots in, you're monetizing also the chance of fraud. But regardless, they're doing it and we aren't. And we cannot fix it until we get our people in office. And so we have to figure out a way to match what they are doing, because right now we are looking at a situation heading into 2024 where we do not have a Republican governor, legislature, attorney general, secretary of state in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona. Nevada, we have a governor, but they have a supermajority in the state house and state senate. They don't have the attorney general or any of the other positions. So just even having the governor doesn't matter. So I wish that everyone could go vote in person on election day with their ballot. That is not the world that we're living in right now. We need to fight fire with fire. We need to play the game that they are playing, and we need to get our people into office and actually pass election integrity. But I just don't really see a way for us to sue our way out of it. I don't think we're organized enough to sue our way out of it. I don't think we have the funding to sue our way out of it. I don't think we have the attorneys with the will to do it, and I don't think we have the judges with the courage to take the case. So we have to find something else.
So what do we do, Caroline? Some people believe like civilization is simply cracking. Some people believe that America is, it's like on a slide and it's unrecoverable. A lot of us were hopeful that this election in 2022 would be a bigger wave. I certainly predicted it over and over and over again. I thought the Democrats had a tactic to say, oh, no, it's a very tight race that would allow them to perpetrate more fraud. But whatever the case, now we got the results. 2024, how does one feel optimistic about our chances in 2024?
I'm not optimistic,
right.
So I'm sorry.
You and Matt both. This is why you two get along
so close to Christmas. Yeah. I wish I had better news, but I will say that for myself, what I'm focused on is I think we have a a lack in leadership problem right now in our party. And I think that the buck for that stops with, in my opinion, with the Republican National Committee and Ronna McDaniel. I think we've had underperformances the past 3 cycles. We underperformed in 2018. We underperformed in 2020. We underperformed in 2022. And it's very frustrating to watch the same leaders, whether or not you want to say that's McCarthy, McConnell, and Ronna McDaniel. It's still a problem. We have the same leaders, the same consultants running everything, switching between committees. And if you owned a football team and you had 3 consecutive losing seasons, you would fire the head coach or at minimum trade some of the players. We're not doing either. And so, like, why do we expect any sort of different outcome unless we make those changes? And for me, the frustration lies with people like Blake Masters. How is it that Mitch McConnell never came in to fund any money on Blake Masters? Arizona Senate race was always going to be competitive and tight. He came in and spent $10 million in the Colorado Senate race, which is bizarre, was spending on Lisa Murkowski, which is a total waste of money. And it all had to do with just this hatred of Donald Trump. And they've got to get over it to just win races. Blake Masters is always going to be a better vote than Mark Kelly. And how McConnell and Senate Leadership Fund and these other groups are so blinded by their hatred of Trump versus winning elections is just shocking to me.
Yeah, I think it's created a huge division in the party. We're all obviously right now seeing the omnibus being pushed through with Mitch McConnell and a lot of these retiring Republicans and
23 Republican senators.
And these rhinos. It's shocking to me that they're going to support the Democrats' spending obsession with spending and what they're spending it on. It's not on border security. It's on securing the border in Jordan and Lebanon and Oman. I mean, it's insane.
And look, we haven't done this before where we've now picked up the House majority, which even though Caroline and I could be pessimistic about our state, that's a big win. And the House is more important than the Senate because all it takes is a majority of one if you hold it to like have your way. But, you know, why would we undercut that new majority with a big $1.7 trillion bill with tons of pork barrel spending? It just shows you that the Republican Party is just not serious about the issues that they tell the voters they're serious on.
I agree. I mean, we used to stand for something, and we don't anymore. And I don't know if the vacuum suck leadership, when technically that started. I mean, you have to think back to even like the Newt Gingrich days. Like that was amazing. Even with GoPac, he would record a tape every week, and everyone would stay on the message and send it out. Everyone knew what we were all working towards and working towards goals. I think what happened with when we got Trump in, we had an incredible leader there, but then just what did we even really get done, though? You had a terrible leader in Paul Ryan, frankly, and then you had Mitch McConnell, who's always been a terrible leader. So the omnibus bill, like, color me shocked. I'm not shocked. This is a pattern of behavior by these people. It is a culture that they want to keep going that originates in D.C. Going back to the RNC race, I know I keep pushing back, but I do think we have a problem with leadership. And someone who I'm really supporting is someone named Harmeet Dillon. She's incredible. She's a constitutional attorney who is an absolute fighter, I think, can unite this party. But what I loved about her when I first asked her, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And what do you want to see change? She said, first of all, why is the RNC even in DC? We need to decentralize and get these talent out of Washington and put them out into the states. And that's one of the biggest problems when you look at even the McConnell consultants or these committees. It's like everyone it's Republican Inc. They make money, win or lose. They don't care. They make money when the omnibus bill passes because they're consultants. All these firms now, the consulting firms that make money under TV buys, also have a public affairs wing. Then they lobby for Google and Amazon and Apple and all these people. So their job is to get these folks into office, and they're failing. But the ones they do get into office, they force them to vote on these absurd things that are against every Republican principle that I know you and I have. So it begs the question of, like, what are we even all doing here? Once we get them elected, why?
Yeah, no.
This is a huge problem, and I think the Republican Party has to come face to face. Its leaders, its elected officials has to come face to face with, do they agree with any of these things they campaign on? You know, they say they want to ban abortion, but then when they have the chance to do something on it, they all start, getting all nervous about pro-life laws.
Limited government, limited spending, border security.
Putting a padlock on the IRS.
Yeah, that's
what
right.
about that
That's
one?
right. And they just have caved into the Democrats. Caroline Wren, it has been so much fun having you on our show and giving us an update live from Arizona. We really appreciate it. We'll be very close in touch with you as this trial continues to unfold.
Fabulous. Well, Merry Christmas. Thank you for having me on.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, and remember, you can always catch America Uncanceled with Matt and Mercedes Schlapp on the podcast world, wherever you get your podcast. And Merry Christmas to you all, and God bless, and thanks for watching.